Our next panel will explore the future role of private capital in national security. Please welcome Dr. Jason Rathje, Director of the Department of Defense's Office of Strategic Capital, Joshua Baer, CEO of the Capital Factory, Nick Beim, a partner at Venrock, and Katherine Boyle, General Partner at Andreessen Horowitz, in conversation with Mrs. Stephanie Carter.
I'm determined our panel will not be the one that has the microphone problems. But good afternoon. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank SCSP, the whole team, and everyone that's participated. And it was also really great to see the previous panel, my stepson up here moderating like a huge adult, and he's a brilliant one. But many of you probably don't know that in my former life, I was at a growth equity firm. And so when I saw this panel, I decided to step up so that I could ask the unusual suspects some unusual questions so that we can learn more about the role of private capital. We have talked very openly about how optimistic we are about what resides in the United States. And we've talked about having, some of the best companies, some of the best intellectual capital. But one of the things that we didn't talk probably enough about is that we have a risk capital and capital formation system like nowhere else in the world. And I think when you bring those things together, that is why we are the ones sitting here with however many of the trillion-dollar companies that exist in the world. So that's what we want to talk about. And we have a really esteemed panel, and I'm going to let them do something that they probably put people on the spot to do all the time. I'm going to ask them two things: to do their quick elevator pitch, and secondly, to say what they do, what their focus is. And then secondly, I'm going to ask you to just say, for fun, because it's late in the afternoon, one thing that we wouldn't know about you from your CV. Katherine, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, and I thank you for joining us. Your assistant worked till the ends of the earth to make this happen, and I really appreciate it.
I know, and I very much wish I could be there in person today. I was actually this morning at Miami Fleet Week with the Secretary of the Navy and 500 junior ROTC members across Miami-Dade County. And I can't tell you how optimistic and excited I am to be having this conversation after talking to a bunch of 17-year-olds about technology and how it's going to support them in their future careers. So it really is something that reminds you of why we are doing this important work. So I'm Katherine Boyle. I'm a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, where I co-lead the American Dynamism practice. We define American Dynamism as companies that are actively supporting the national interest. It's a very broad category of companies, obviously things like aerospace, defense, national security, but also things like critical infrastructure, energy, the kind of core infrastructure and built world technologies that touch all Americans. So very excited to share more about how we've been investing in these categories and how really I think there's been not only a sea change in Washington and inside the Department of Defense and how technology is thought about, but also really a sea change in Silicon Valley and how we think about investing in CapEx-intensive industries and just how particularly artificial intelligence and software is really going to transform every built world industry and have dramatic effects on national security.
And the thing we wouldn't know about you from reading your CV?
Yeah, well, so I am a proud native Floridian. I moved back to Florida during COVID, which is another thing that I think in many ways American Dynamism exemplifies, and that you can build technology anywhere. But that was after 7 years in Silicon Valley, and I can say that I am much happier in Florida than in Silicon Valley.
Perfect. Nick?
Yeah, so my name is Nick Beim. I'm a venture capitalist. I'm a partner at Venrock. Venrock is one of the oldest venture capital firms. I focus primarily on artificial intelligence companies, a substantial subsection of which serve the national security community. In many ways, I'm a national security geek who lost his way and ended up in venture capital. And it's very meaningful to be able to combine my two interests by investing in these companies. The one interesting thing I would say that you wouldn't know from my CV is when I was 20 and 21, I was running around the Soviet Union as the lead researcher on the book Charlie Wilson's War. And I was interviewing senior Soviet military people and a lot of junior ones who had just come back from this war that they felt, many of whom felt they shouldn't have fought. And if you want to interview someone from the Russian military, the only way they'll talk at all is if you drink with them. And if you're an American, they want to see how much you can drink. The only way they'll tell you anything is if you can keep up with them. So I think my current self, I'm a shadow of my former self when it comes to alcohol tolerance, but I had a lot of great interviews and it was a fun experience.
Yeah, Ash used to go to the former Soviet Union, and he drank a bunch of punch once because he was thirsty and there wasn't bottled water in those days, and ended up being carried home by Bill Perry. So definitely know that. Josh.
Well, hi, so glad to be here. I'm Josh Baer. I'm the founder of Capital Factory. We're the most active early stage investor in Texas, which, in case you haven't noticed, is basically the future of our economy. And where a ton of national defense is going on. We've been investing in all kinds of startups across all industries, really geographically focused on Texas for the past decade. But actually, when Ash first came down, he helped establish what is now like a mini startup Pentagon in Austin, where we have the Army Futures Command, AFWorks, NavalX, DARPA, a whole host of other groups there on site with us, scouting for startups. And there's really nothing like that anywhere else. And it creates this amazing energy around national defense and bringing hundreds of companies into the ecosystem that had never been part of it before. And so I never expected to be part of this conversation. But so glad that that spark was started there and that it's continued to grow. And we're really excited about how we can contribute. And probably the thing that everybody used to know about me, but barely anybody does anymore, but you'd remember, is that for 7 years, which when I met Ash was right in the middle of that, I wore a camera on my lapel right here that took a picture every 30 seconds. And it was part of like a big kind of data collection experiment with the future of knowing that we'd be able to feed it all to some AI that would be able to look at all the pictures and figure out what's there and what we could do with it. And I stopped kind of during COVID because it got silly to wear the camera walking around my house. But we're now, with everything that's going on, like we're so much on the cusp of being able to just upload all those 7 years worth of photos to what's going to feel like, Google Photos or the Photos app or something like that, and then be able to talk to it using generative AI and ask questions like of the photos and have it know, when was that? What was I wearing when I first saw? Well, I was wearing this shirt, but what was Ash wearing when I first saw him? And tell me about that day or anything like that. And it should be able to, I think, pull all that together. So really excited to sometime soon pull out to put in there.
All right, Jason.
So Jason Rathje, I'm the director for the Office of Strategic Capital. I think we're still the newest organization inside of the Department of Defense, and it's our mission to attract and scale private capital for national security. Like you said, the U.S. capital markets are the largest and the most liquid in the world, and we see them as a national competitive advantage for the United States. But our focus today is on increasing investment, private capital investment, that are systemically or historically underinvested. And so our focus today is on the critical technology areas that are hardware-centric and require patient, long-term capital investment opportunities that we see investors shying away from, more so than not. And I know we'll probably get into this a little bit in the panel, but the really great opportunity that we see at OSC today is that we were just recently authorized and appropriated funds to stand up a loan program office inside of the DoD. First Title X loan program office. Similar to many other loan offices across the U.S. government, the Department of Defense traditionally spends money. Now, for the first time, we can lend money, which is great for the department. It's great for the taxpayer, but it provides us a great opportunity to work directly with investors and with companies to provide CapEx investments. Katherine talked about, I think I've been on 10 panels with you, Katherine, over the last 7 years or so. But providing opportunities to help expand CapEx, critical infrastructure, production capacity in the United States and with partners and allies like we've never been able to do before. Fact that you may not know about me is this is my third government startup, so I'm a full-on glutton for punishment. But the first startup that had the opportunity to join in was a startup called the Rat Pack. So I think we've gotten better at naming these things over time. But it was the Rapid Acquisition Technologies, Procedures, and Collaboration organization that taught what we used to, before innovation was a thing, we used to have rapid acquisitions. This was back during the War on Terror, back when Ash was in the seat. How do we rapidly acquire and field technologies for the global war on terror? And we were fortunate to have been part of that mission in the early days of our careers. And so I had an opportunity to build a new organization that be able to pay it forward to new generations of acquisition officers, contractors, contracting officers, engineers, program managers, and how to rapidly acquire, test, and field systems.
Yeah, I remember a lot of the balloons in Afghanistan and lots of cool stuff. I want to, I do want to get into that later, but I do want to ask you guys from your vantage point. This is sort of, if we could just go through in the same order, or you can build on what each other is saying. How would you characterize the funding environment right now for companies, not just the funding environment, but the exit environment? What's the kind of mood and what's the deal flow look like? Katherine, you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, so I've called this wrong so many times, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But a few years ago, I said very publicly that time was running out, that investors were going to get tired of investing in things like defense technology if they didn't see real production contracts awarded to venture-backed startups. I, handicapped it at about 2.5 years. Here we are 2.5 years later, and I don't think I've ever seen such excitement and enthusiasm for investing in defense tech across a wide variety of investment firms. I think it's something that pretty much every serious investment firm, kind of traditional Silicon Valley investment firm, has at least one partner who's focused on aerospace defense, who now understands sort of the, when you hear people talk about sort of the contracting mechanisms, 5 years ago, they would have been asking questions like, what does it mean to have a production contract, or what do these acronyms mean? And I think there's now a very educated investor base that wants to invest in companies that are selling directly to government. And that is no longer seen as taboo. It's no longer seen as something that could potentially not yield great returns. So I think in some ways we're sitting at sort of this golden period where investors are not only curious about investing in defense and national security, they see it as a core part of their practice. In terms of exits, I think everyone always looks to the fact that most of the companies of the what we would call new defense, they haven't gone public yet. Companies like SpaceX, companies like Anduril, but they've been so successful in kind of helping other companies, kind of, I would say, like almost breaking the glass so that other companies can come in their wake, that I think investors are extremely excited and enthusiastic about the early stage companies that are being formed today and that are growing and have this opportunity to sort of ride the wake of the ones that sort of paved the way. So I'm incredibly optimistic. Again, I am an early stage investor, so I have to be optimistic. But I think if we look back over the last few years and just how it took, 5 years ago, there were many people in Silicon Valley investment firms who said it doesn't make sense to invest in anything that sells to DoD, not only from an economic perspective, but also from just they didn't agree with the mission. And I think everything about that has changed. It's been a complete 180, and that's been such a great thing, for American dynamism and particularly for the country.
Yeah, Nick, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I might break the question into two pieces. One, just the general environment, then specifically for defense tech. The general environment is recovering from a hangover. Tech innovation always has and always will grow through these boom and bust cycles. And it relates to how excited people and businesses get about new technologies, how much traction they get in the broader economy, and then how overexcited people get, including investors. And we've seen this time and again, and I think we always will. It's human nature. It's the nature of tech development. We've just come off the biggest boom in the history of tech, and the hangover was pretty bad. So the amount of investing in venture capital is way down. It's down like 2/3. The amount of new funds being raised, way down. Number of exits is down probably 90%. So very few IPOs, very few big acquisitions, and that'll all come back. As gloomy as that all sounds, they're good things that happen when you have a hangover. Your body's recovering, the system's recovering. And I think in this particular case, the labor markets have freed up. You have all these incredibly talented tech people who suddenly are looking for really interesting new opportunities, and valuations have come down, and it's allowed a lot more people to sort of participate in ways that they might not have been able to otherwise. Amidst that hangover recovery, we've seen the birth of generative AI, which makes it feel like it's 2021 all over again, and an incredibly exciting technology, perhaps the most significant, or certainly one of the most significant platform shifts that we've seen, that I think is in the first of many innings it will have. So the valuations that we're seeing and the amount of dollars going into generative AI is just stunning. And I think we'll see a lot of interesting things. in defense tech, just to build on the points that Katherine made, I'd say something that I think a lot of people in this room have the ability to influence. It's a really fascinating moment for defense tech because, as Katherine was saying, people in the venture capital industry are very interested in investing in companies that serve the defense and national security communities. It's a terrific thing. It hasn't happened before, and it's happening for a variety of reasons. One is we've lost the sort of peaceful unipolar moment, and we've seen this sort of violent resurgence of great power competition, or in Europe or in the Middle East. I think there is a powerful sense of mission amongst a lot of investors. Those of us who focus deeply on this industry care a lot about the mission, and there's just huge secular trends because we need more advanced technologies, more advanced digital technologies, better adoption in the DoD and the IC, given our geopolitical competition with China. And the point I would make on that particular dynamic is this. This is a golden moment, but only if it works for both sides. There's a lot of money going in right now. If that money helps create really successful companies that can provide a lot of value to the Department of Defense, a lot of value to the intelligence community, that's terrific. What that will mean is that we'll have billions, tens of billions more money coming in. This will become a stable sector of venture capital, just like infrastructure software, just like communications infrastructure. It'll be a category. And it will enable the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, to leverage tens, ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars of other people's money. It works for all participants involved if there are successful companies and more capital comes in. If we blow it, if only one, maybe two, there are two meaningful, successful companies, a lot of people like myself in venture capital firms who have been betting hundreds of millions of dollars will be looked at by our partners and say, gosh, there have only been about 2 or 3 wins. I don't think this is an area we can afford to continue to focus on. So I would just say if we could all take advantage of this moment, I think, Eric Schmidt has famously said that the DoD and I think the IC don't have an innovation problem, they have an innovation adoption problem. I know a lot's being done, and Ash is the person who started all of this, and none of us, I think, would be here without his help. But if we're able to build on the progress that's been made, I think this can become a permanent area of venture capital investment, and it'd be great for the country.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Venrock is a top name in this, but we've seen it happen in biotech cycles, right? And, biotech is really highly dependent on the capital markets picking up the risk at some point and creating successful, exits. And every time those wash out, a whole bunch of firms and a whole bunch of partners that invested in biotech wash out with it. And, I think you're absolutely right. It's got to be a win-win. What about, Josh, anything you're seeing at the early stage deep in the heart of Texas there?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with everything I've heard. There's an incredible energy, particularly around national defense, that just has never been seen before, and that we should, really lean into. And so I agree with all of that. From the really, I work at the really early stage. I think that's all defined a little differently by everybody, but I'm probably towards the earlier part of it here. And I was talking with a friend of mine who founded a company in the first .com boom called Evite, which hopefully many of you have all used. And now he's the CEO of Etsy. His name's Josh Silverman. And I think he summed it up really well. He said, back then in the boom time, it was really easy to raise money and really hard to run a company because everybody had money. So that means it was hard to hire people. It was hard to get real estate. It was hard to get get service providers, to get people to return your calls, to get attention. And now it's hard to raise money, but it's a lot easier to run a company because if you have money, you've got a lot of talent available, and you've got lots of options right now, particularly with the real estate market, as you might need, and all these other things you can go do. So I think that's true, and also, like Nick said, it's cyclical. It's going to go up and down, and fortunately, this area works both in the up and in the down. But this is a really good time to invest. I think it's a great time to be an investor. It's a great time to be a founder. You just have to understand the dynamic that you're in, and that means that in a lot of ways, only the best things are getting funded right now. Like there's lots of deals happening, but they're really, really good deals, and the valuations are very attractive. And so I think that's going to bode well for continued good results.
Yeah, Jason, maybe now you can dive into. You and I were talking about sort of your mission, and it sounds like you're really a little bit more mapping out where there are some gaps. What is your sort of approach to deal flow, and now that you have this nice pile of money, how do you imagine deploying it? We debated whether it was harder for him to get his money or for us to have to visit a ton of limited partners in lots of state capitals. But he said that he had to get 435 yeses and then another 100 yeses. So maybe. But tell us about how you're thinking about, now that you have this capital, where you're going to spend your time and what you're seeing out there.
No, I mean, I think, we, by the nature of our mission, we always have a pessimistic view of where the capital markets are. Our focus is on areas that are inherently undercapitalized. So what do I mean by that? I think the intent behind OSC was to focus on the critical industries that support our broader national and economic security. So we don't focus on pointy things that go boom. We focus on the underlying industries that are required to support defense capabilities. We don't focus on airplanes, or we don't focus on fighter jets. We focus on semiconductors. We focus on advanced materials. We focus on biotech, but non-pharmaceutical biotech. We look at biochemicals, bioenergetics. And in our investment strategy, which we released a few months back, we talk a bit about how do we determine what our priorities are going to be. And one of the big focuses is, what is the capital environment? What's the private capital environment in these sub-industries that make up these critical technology areas? And when you look at some of these industries, they're pretty scary when you think about this from a global technology competition landscape. So advanced materials, for example, the median amount of capital that a typical company receives in the advanced materials space is 20 to 30% less than the capital is required to actually exit in the advanced materials space, which is not a good place to be from an industry perspective or a policy perspective if we think advanced materials are critical to the future of national security. It means that there is not a lot of capital to commercialize all the R&D spending we're putting into advanced materials today. And then on top of that, the mean time to exit in a lot of these industries is significantly higher than I think even venture is willing to take, or at least we've seen venture historically willing to take, right? We're talking 12, 13, 14-year cycles. So the intent of where we've been building our OSC tools is to help focus on those specific industries, right? How do we work with capital providers in the early stage and work with companies in the later stages to provide the necessary capital so that they can help scale to achieve the production capacities and the requirements that we need both within the department and then our broader economy. And there's key ways that we can do that today. So the one program we launched last year is a partnership with the SBA called this SBIC, the Small Business Investment Company Critical Technologies Initiative. The SBIC program, founded in 1958, was designed to help catalyze this burgeoning thing called venture capital. Venrock was just coming on the scene, but there wasn't a lot of investors investing in equity-based risky startups. But you had this company, Fairchild Semiconductor, which was doing phenomenal work. And as Sputnik crossed our skies, the Eisenhower administration had to figure a way to catch up. And the SBIC program was founded at the same time DARPA and NASA were, with the intent of increasing early stage equity investment in critical technology areas, and went on to fund companies like Intel and Sun and Apple and Cray Research, companies vital to national security, and did it at little to no cost to the taxpayer, which is really the best part about these types of tools from a policy perspective. And we brought the intent of the Critical Technologies Initiative was to bring back some of that focus to the SBIC program, to focus it on long-term patient equity investments. And that program's been operating for about 6 months now. We have over a dozen funds kind of well into the hopper, and we hope to license our first funds through that program, where we provide loans to investors to increase early stage investment in these very difficult technology areas. Talking with investors in Silicon Valley, and it's great to see the uptick in defense investment. It's been incredible to see that. While I was a student at Stanford, as Katherine said, I'd walk around, talk to investors, and nobody wanted to invest in defense. To now, we see a massive uptick of defense tech investment, but that is still focused on defense tech. And you can find investors who are willing to invest in defense tech. You can't find a lot of investors that are willing to do early stage investment in semiconductor companies, to be frank. And so that's a critical technology area. It's vital to our future national security. But then you look on the later stages, not just venture-backed companies, private equity-backed companies, lower middle market companies that need to recapitalize production lines that have been around for 20, 30 years. And if banks aren't willing to provide equipment financing to help those companies recapitalize at the tenors that are required to actually buy the equipment they need to meet production schedules, to meet competitive costing internationally, then you're going to see a continued degradation of U.S. or allied industries in those spaces. And so as we think about the long-term vision for OSC, it's how do we build on the continuation of capital from early stage, seed stage investment all the way through, post-IPO into kind of steady state private capital cash flowing businesses, opportunities so that these industries can have access to the financing they need to help support both our national economic security.
Thanks. I'm curious, maybe Nick, Josh, Katherine, whoever wants to step in. It's great to hear a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, broadly against venture capital. We used to have rules that you don't invest in a married couple or anyone that sells to the government. And so it's good to see that, that is kind of lifting and there is this dedication. But is there something, you guys have focused on it for longer, is there something that having looked at other partners and other types of investments, is there something you think that is different skill set you have to bring to bear? Do you have to underwrite differently? Do you have to, in terms of your board role, do you have to be imparting a different skill set? Anyone can jump in. All of you can jump in.
Sure, I'm happy to start. It's incredibly difficult. So investing in early stage companies, helping them grow, starting early stage companies, helping them grow is hard enough as it is. If you throw on top of that, building for the government, you have to deal with a Ptolemaic acquisition process that it'll take you 6 months to just sort of come up to intermediate level on. You'll have to deal with an existing set of economic players who kind of don't want a lot of competition and may be more interested in doing something themselves than partnering with a company that's got a ready solution. You've got to deal with, government shutdowns. You got to deal with suddenly budgets are shifting because something political has happened. You've got to deal with the famous valley of death, which is you can create a terrific product that really thoughtful government customers say, we want that. And as soon as we get the allocations from the Hill, so in 4 years, can you start that? That's when, that's like 4 dog lives for most startups, and they're gonna have to get the money to survive that long. And they're usually built to survive 18 to 24 months before they need their next shot of oxygen. So it's incredibly hard. But all that said, when they break through, sometimes the scale of the companies they can build is so significant because they can offer so much value. And, DoD is the largest organization on the planet. So if it's SpaceX, and we've seen this with Palantir, and a number of other companies have just been able to reach an immense scale. So there's a lot of risk. There's certainly very significant reward for the companies that work. But I would say the system is tilted incredibly heavily against startups. And it's tilted in dozens of ways. I won't list them all. I think probably people in the room know a lot of those ways. The most important thing we look for in entrepreneurs, particularly in this area, is people who are just relentlessly persistent and people who understand their customers. Often people who come from the military community, the intelligence community, they understand the missions, they understand the needs. But it's very hard. And I think it's to some extent on us to prove that this works repeatedly at scale. There have been, maybe 5, 6 meaningful wins. I think it's possible. And the DoD and the AC are improving. They're making acquisition easier. There's some terrific new initiatives that are trying to encourage people in this organization to take more risk. Try betting on startups. The background pattern that I think we all understand well, but just bears repeating, is the DoD created Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was sort of exhaust from, early basic research investments made by the DoD, made by National Science Foundation, DARPA, and so on. And subsequent to that, Silicon Valley has grown so much that it's now way bigger than the defense industry. The whole defense industry's R&D is less than I think like half the R&D of Apple or Amazon. I mean, the scale is so big. And if you're able to ride that scale and the efficiencies of the technology that come with it, if you recall when the F-35 was created, it was the supercomputer in the sky. Today, like an iPhone has more processing, or when it was introduced, the iPhone had more processing power than an F-35 because the rate of improvement of those microelectronics was so great. If the DoD and the IC can harness those productivity curves, and they can harness like the best of entrepreneurial capitalism, there are a number of things this country we're good at. One thing we're incredibly good at is entrepreneurial capitalism. We have incredible entrepreneurs, a very sophisticated finance system around them. I would just love it if the government could fully benefit from that. But if they can, I think the returns will be very significant.
Yep. Katherine, anything you would add?
Absolutely. So I'll echo that. It is definitely very hard. And I'll say in the same way that, there's been sort of, I would call almost an education process of helping the DoD understand how venture investing works. There has been an education process inside of most firms internally that this type of investing is very different than pure software investing. Most of these companies don't receive real contracts until year 2 or year 3 into their journey. And in the case of, pure software selling to enterprise or selling to other startups, you want to see that much, much earlier. And there's clear financial metrics that everyone in the industry has learned, understands. And those are sort of the playbooks of how you invest in venture-backed companies. So what I think took time internally in Silicon Valley to build is an understanding of what it means to be a great defense tech company, even if you don't have that production contract. And so it was in some ways a different valley of death for us because it was more, is this the top tier team that's going to be able to crack the nut of the DoD? Are they going to be able to understand how to work with the customer? Do they have advocates inside? Do they understand how to work with Congress? I mean, there's a lot of, I think, the playbook that now investors understand that looks very different than, say, a true software company. The other thing that I'll add that, I think a lot has changed in the last few years, say last 5 or 7 years. One of it is this playbook of understanding how to work with Washington. But the second thing that I think has changed is you now have 20 years of young people having gone to the school of Elon Musk at SpaceX or at Tesla, and they understand top-tier manufacturing. And that was, 10 years ago, we didn't have that. We didn't have that culture of manufacturing and culture of production that now exists in venture-backed ecosystem. So I think between the kind of playbooks of what does best-in-class manufacturing look like in hardware, and then 2, what does it look like to really understand how to work with the DoD and how to work with Washington on something that's really important for the warfighter? Those are playbooks and those are talent networks that have opened up where now you see those people leaving the companies where those playbooks were born and building their own companies. And so that I really think is why we're, to use the word, we're in a golden age. It's also because the talent is so educated and they've seen what works, they've seen what doesn't, they've, atoned for the mistakes of the past. They understand what manufacturing and best-in-class manufacturing looks like, and they're bringing all of that together.
Josh, you're sort of, you mentioned DIU, you mentioned Army Futures Command. So you have the advantage of sort of having outposts of a lot of the Pentagon co-located with you. I mean, do you think that sort of you're having a material advantage in sort of having those companies understand the nut they're going to crack, or are some of those hurdles removed by having those outposts? That was the initial thinking behind DIUX, now DIU. How do you think that's kind of working, having that physical presence?
Yeah, it's had a huge impact since this all started, which has been 5 or 6 years. We track just the companies in our portfolio that we work with, which are a few hundred, and we know of hundreds of millions of dollars in SBIR and other non-dilutive funding that's been awarded during that time, and almost none of those companies were working with the government before that. And so that's hundreds of companies that are now engaged that weren't part of it before, who never thought of themselves as working with the government, and now they're working with NASA to go build a moon base, or doing disaster recovery, or flying missions out to boats, or things like that. And so there's a lot of that happening. It's both sides of it. It's educating the entrepreneurs about what do they need to do to be able to work with the government, to educate them about adversarial capital, about not taking investment that they shouldn't, that's going to prohibit them from working with the government or going to hurt them later. That's another big theme of it. And then how to navigate this super complex process that they're not used to working with, how to navigate SBIRs and filling out the forms and making sure they qualify and security requirements and all those other things around it. So I think that all really helps. From our side, we've been doing this, particularly working with government and defense sector companies for, like I said, 5 or 6 years. We haven't seen what the exits look like yet. Like, we don't really know what happens at the end. We got companies that are doing really well, and it's not all that we focus on. And these companies are not only focused on that, but we're still kind of waiting to see how some of that plays out. And it used to be that government was a dirty word, hardware was a dirty word. There were a lot of dirty words that aren't so dirty anymore, that that investors are excited to be part of, but that we haven't, at least for me being where I am, I haven't seen all that play out yet. So what we're really looking for now is really one of two things as we look to get excited about an early stage company that's in the defense sector. Either they need to have a really strong commercial business model that stands alone, and this almost replaces a round of funding. It's like, instead of having to go around and get a round of funding, we're going to go down this process, and it's going to fund a big chunk of our R&D that's going to give us more capabilities in the commercial market, as well as this additional revenue stream. And it's not seen as something they're super dependent on exclusively, but it's this value add. And that's a way that a lot of investors have gotten comfortable with it. If you're really primarily focused on the government as your initial market, even if you expect to be able to do dual use later, the bar is a lot higher. You now need to be like a contracting ninja. You can't just be on one path. You need to be on a bunch of paths. You need to have a whole bunch of things going and show that you really know how to navigate this, if that's going to be the core of your business model. And those are, I don't want to say 1 in 100, but maybe that compared to the others. Those are really few and far between, because not many people know how to navigate that.
Jason, if you're sitting here next year at the next Ash Carter exchange, just putting it out there, but if you're sitting here next year and you're saying, God, it's been a really good year, what will have happened?
If I could just take a quick side, and I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
I've had the great fortune of kind of seeing the evolution as a student, and then back in government, helping to stand up an organization called AFWorks and doing a lot of these kind of policy shifts around how we apply the SBIR program and bring in a lot of new entrants and lower the barriers to entry. Because you need to bring both sides to the table if you want to change the way both the kind of the broader tech ecosystem and the government are collaborating together. But a lot of the foundational research that went into how we modified the SBIR program to do a lot of that work actually came from a book called Beyond Spinoff. Kind of helped us go down the starting path of that journey, which was co-authored by Ash Carter back in the 90s. And so we say collectively this has been happening for 5 to 6 years, but it actually has been happening for a lot longer. I think, the thinking behind this goes back to the 90s and the transformation of understanding the uptick of private sector R&D and the relative downtick of government R&D. And as a percentage of GDP, we're continuing to spend less and less as a government on R&D. And so those fundamental shifts, it's not just hey, we can ride the wave. It becomes a fundamental national security requirement to engage in new and innovative ways. And I think it's a testament to Ash Carter and all the research that he's been doing, and his big brain and the thinking that he did back in the 90s and early 2000s, bringing economists and policy thinkers together to try to understand how macroeconomic environments are going to influence the technology ecosystem. What do we need to do as a country to make sure we have technology advantage going forward? I think for OSC in a year, what do we look like? I mean, we've stood up a banking institution inside of the Department of Defense, loan program office. We're in the hiring throes right now. So if you're interested in working and coming into the government to help from this side, we are hiring, it's always a great position to be in.
Where can people email you?
If you come visit us on our website, you can just Google Office of Strategic Capital, or it's cto.mil/OSC. We post all the positions there as they become available. But by this time next year, hopefully we've exercised. We've got funds operating. We have loans out the door. And I will say, I'm putting an exponential pace on this, just like we did at AFWorks. The typical loan program office in the U.S. government takes 885 days to stand up. So I think we're going to do it in lightning pace. So hopefully by this time next year, we actually have intent to commits out, and companies are able to use our financing to build production and capacity in the United States.
So, you see this amazing, I hope people that are so inclined really will consider working with Jason, because, I think there are so many things we can all contribute. And, we don't have to think, well, I'm not political or I don't know anything about the government. If you have a talent to contribute, you should do so. And so I hope at least you have some more applications on your desk by the time you get back today. But for the entrepreneurs out there, and this has also been great, I'm sure people have been through Startup Alley and the AI Expo and everything. But for the entrepreneurs out there, and maybe as Josh said, I've started in commercial and I'm kind of exploring this, or maybe I'm starting something for the first time. They don't have a lot of capital, so whatever your advice is, it can't cost money. I call it Do It Monday. They should be able to go and act it. Catherine, what is sort of a capability you would suggest that they first focus on, or a hire they should make, or what's your advice to someone just kind of getting launched here?
So a number of things. One is I think this is a community that really sees the benefit in collaboration. I'm often asked about competition, and one of the things that I think is unique about, we've all been on panels together, as Jason says, for many years. And in the venture community, this was a small community of investors that really believed in this mission, and so we helped each other and supported each other. And I think entrepreneurs are the same. So the first piece of advice I'd say is go talk to the people who've done it. Go get some mentors. Go talk to the founders who are 24 months ahead of you, who've sold something into government. They are more than happy to tell you their playbooks. And I think this is sort of the magic of the ecosystem, that everyone is, of course, there's competition in business, but everyone is fighting for the same country and the same mission. And so this is a collaborative community. So find those people, get them on your cap table. A lot of them are, very strong angel investors, but align them to you and learn as much as you possibly can so that you can shorten that valley of death on your own. The thing that I think we are constantly focused on, to go back to your question of what does next year look like, every year we want to continue building products that shorten that valley of death on our end. It's not just, let's blame the DoD because we can't get things through to procurement. What can we do as investors to educate founders, to help them make the right connections? And what can we do to help them, as they get through that hard part of the company build? So for the entrepreneurs who are really early in their journey, the best thing you can do is just learn as much as possible from the people who sort of broke the glass, who got in there first, because they are more than willing to see this, to help you. And they also want to see this ecosystem grow.
Nick, what's your best
advice to entrepreneurs? There are a lot of different companies that can serve this community, and maybe I'll answer this question for kind of a subset of the venture-backed entrepreneurs who are swinging big and hoping to raise venture money. The first is I would seek to be best in class at what you're doing. So if you're making quantum sensors, if you're developing an AI platform that can do something distinctive, create a new capability that doesn't exist, assemble a group of advisors and a team that by themselves should convince any thoughtful observer, wow, that's pretty impressive. Those guys really have a terrific team together to be able to tackle this problem. They haven't built anything yet, but I would be inclined to bet on them. They have a lot of unfair advantages. Our business is so people-focused. I've been delighted when I've spoken to folks in government who are adopting, maybe who are looking at AI companies that I've invested in, and they say, you know why we loved it? We love the product, but the team is stronger than any that we've seen. That's how we look at the world. It's a very people-centric view. So I would pull together a team, and they would have a technology team, typically someone also who really understands the government community. Maybe, as I said before, who came out of the DoD, who came out of the IC, who feels the problems, understands the problems, and a group of advisors. I would also pick a problem that's urgent. If it's not urgent, someone else is going to get the business. If it's not, wow, we need this now, or this is a capability that could help us tremendously, chances are they're going to hire some company, big company. We all know they're going to develop it over a 6-year time frame. It might or might not work well, but it's going to be hard to get people's attention as a startup. If, on the other hand, you can say, we're going to do something that we know you really need. It's a piece of the solution. It's not the whole solution, but we're going to do this well, and we've assembled a team that's incredibly credible in this area, then I think you've got a shot, and you've got a great shot to raise money. But that's the general pattern we look for.
Yeah.
I think of two real pieces of advice, and my audience I'd direct it to really would be the entrepreneur out there who's maybe either just getting started or kind of feeling a little bit like they're struggling and hitting a wall. And I'd build on both what Katherine and Nick said, the camaraderie and the help of other entrepreneurs and other people, and then also the importance of the team. The first one is maybe a little counterintuitive to many people that might be coming from DC or from the government markets, but that you really should talk to as many people as you can about what you're doing. And that doesn't mean you have to tell everybody all your secrets, but good things happen from talking to lots of people, and not much happens from sitting around by yourself not talking to anybody. So if you're feeling like you're hitting a wall, you want to go talk to a lot of different people and interact with a lot of people and meet them and find a place to ask for advice, find people to help you. And then the second thing is that often if you feel like you're hitting a wall, you're struggling, there's no easy fix. Like these are all hard things to change. But keeping that in mind, one of the things that you can do that if you're able to can have the most quickest impact and the biggest impact is to add somebody to the team, is to bring on a co-founder or someone else that changes the whole equation, where the next day everything's different. The next day it's way easier to go raise money because look who's on my team. It's way easier to go get a customer or get a contract because look who's on my team. It's way easier to go hire and build a great team or have people believe you will because look who's on my team. That really can change things overnight. And to Nick's point about building a world-class team, I think a lot of entrepreneurs who are getting started, they set their sights too low. They think, I could never get that person to join my team because they have such an impressive title. They must have such a great job. They must get paid so much money. But actually, a lot of times the grass is kind of greener on the other side. Like that might actually not be a great job. They might be totally capped in what they can do, and they might hate their boss. They might see the opportunity to come work with you as their ability to have this massive impact and make a huge difference. And and if what you're doing is really such a good fit. And so, yeah, I'd go after the best people in the world because that's what you want to be. You want to be the best company in the world. And if what you're really doing is that compelling and that important, and you're that passionate about it, you should be able to convince them to come join you.
Any thoughts from you, Jason?
I don't know if I have thoughts on what you're doing on Monday. I will say, there is a series of programs over the last few years, not just only within the DoD, but across the U.S. government, where there has been a strong focus, both on the legislative side and the executive side, to increase the opportunities for capital for undercapitalized areas. And if you think what you want to build is a hard thing to go do, now, like we haven't seen in the last 70 years, there are new and emerging government programs that are here to support doing hard things. At OSC, we're focused on critical technology areas. When we think about renewable energy, you might not think about DoD. When we think about biotech, you might not think about DoD. When you think about semiconductors, you may not think about DoD, but we do inside of the DoD. Those are all on our priority areas. And so the Department of Defense broadly cares about a lot more things than just kind of defense-specific technologies. We lead the country in R&D across all of our critical technology areas. And so if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a scientist or engineer that's thinking about starting a company in the spaces that may have been traditionally hard for you to raise in the past or build strong companies around, I think now is a great time to reconsider and maybe try your hand at building something truly special.
That's awesome. Thank you. So kind of touching, Katherine, with the focus of your fund, again, not being distinctly just defense technology, but you talked about, American dynamism. It's a really hard word to say for a marketing person. But anyway, but you talked about that, and Jason just touched on it, things that you don't think are contained in national security, but really are. How do you kind of bring all that thinking together, and how do you kind of map that out and kind of help to engage people and say, you may not think of this as being national security related, but it absolutely is.
Wow.
We've lost you for 1 second. They seem to be playing around back there, so. Okay. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
I don't want going back to COVID, but I actually think this generation of founders intuitively understands what we mean when we say, defense industrial base, critical industries, physical built world. there's such an enthusiasm, I think, for, and it is really like young founders and young entrepreneurs and engineers who really see sort of the nexus of hardware and software, these old, tired industries that haven't really been touched by the AI revolution yet, but they are going to be. So in many ways, like when we always say we were responding to the movement that we saw, which is that young people wanted to work on things that were important and things that mattered. And when you had, the kind of response from COVID, which, really showed the weakness of our supply chains, really the need to shore up critical industries, and then the immediate, land war in Europe and Ukraine, I think that was a wake-up call to founders who, frankly, were not born on September 11th, or they don't remember it, when they saw just the importance of defense technology and how important it is to build for the physical world and how fragile, this sort of peacetime they have been living in actually is. And so for us, we didn't really need to pull it together as a thesis or a meme in many ways. And we sort of responded to what we saw from young people who want to build for their country. And in some ways, I feel like the kind of young founders who are, in their 20s and early 30s right now who are building, like just intuitively get it because of the events that have happened in the last few years.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. And on that point, we're talking about all these sort of national treasures we have, our capital markets, our entrepreneurial capitalism, great ideas. And yet, I think there is, I'm old enough to remember, episode of Newhart when the Japanese bought the golf course and the inn, and, we were worried about everyone eating our lunch, and, we've kind of not looked inwardly, and, this is part and parcel that, if it bleeds, it leads, and we are surrounded with a lot of negative news. But, how do we restore, through the types of companies you're working with, how do we restore this sense and, pairing that with this enthusiasm of these young people and mission-focused people, how do we restore our sort of confidence to do hard things? And so if you think about it, is there one thing that you would change in your sector or in the government or working with the government that might be really confidence building? Anyone want to tackle that?
I'd love to, because that's a great core question. I'd start off by saying that in our work, our core work, we only want to focus on people who are seeking to do incredibly hard things, because those are the things that become big wins. Often it's things that a lot of people think are impossible. And sometimes we'll make new investments. Even in the venture industry, some people scratch their heads and say, yeah, Nick, that one, we don't think that one made a lot of sense. And it's terrific when those companies end up succeeding. So when I look at the private sector, when I look at young Americans or any age, going into the entrepreneurial world, there's a ferocious ambition. And I love it. It's great. I think there's a lot more we can do as a country to invest in ourselves, invest in our own capabilities. I think when the Cold War got started, we created STEM education as a result of Department of Defense initiative. That was great. That helped the country a lot. I think investing in STEM, investing in basic research, I think, prior to the CHIPS Act and the, Endless Frontiers Act, a lot of people didn't have basic research and focus in how it created the semiconductor, the internet, a lot of the most high production AI systems today, autonomous driving and so on. So I think there's a lot we can do to invest in ourselves. What I would like to see, so I think that confidence is there in parts of the economy. I think there's a malaise in the country generally, and I think it's connected to our internal visions, but a little bit of a lack of sense of purpose after the end of the Cold War, where we've turned inward to the squabble. But I would love to see the government be willing to take bigger swings, bigger risks, go for big, ambitious projects. And we've done this. Generally it happens when there's a crisis. And so, post-Korea, in World War II, post-Korean War, there were things that were done that were just incredible. The creation of, intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear submarines that were just amazing feats of engineering pulled off by a relatively small number of people in a short period of time. The Manhattan Project. I think we need to get back as a country, as a government, to just believing we can do those things and not letting bureaucracy run things. And so one of the things I loved that Ash did is he would push people to take big swings, to try hard things. And he would let a startup come in and give it a shot. I think SpaceX is a great example. And everybody thought they were going to fail. All the first people they met thought, yeah, who is this kid? Good luck with that. And they've been tremendously successful. So I think something the private sector is a lot better at is taking risk. And in a nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union, you don't want a lot of random risk-taking in the system. So I think a lot of the current systems we have are built to make sure things don't happen. But I think the inertia of a lot of the systems and sensibilities have meant that we're preventing a lot of great things from happening. And the particular subset of great things is big swing, ambitious projects where it's okay to fail. And maybe have a portfolio of them. And rewarding the people who succeed. Because if we only do that in times of crisis, we're going to be much worse off at the beginning of the next crisis. So that's what I'd love to see.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because, we tend to compress history, but, with the kind of anniversary, a lot of us probably went back and looked at the moon program, the space program, and, really saw that it was over a long period of time and they were dealt a bunch of blows. And at every turn, we stuck with it and obviously paid off tremendously. We have under 2 minutes, so I'm just going to do a lightning round, which is and Jason, I know you probably have many of them. What is an area that you are focused on? And since you said it's collaborative, you're not going to be as usually paranoid about giving away state secrets, but what's an area that you're focused on that you don't think people are talking about enough?
I mean, I think we have 12 priority areas. That's in our FY24 investment strategy, but it lasts everything from nanomaterials and metamaterials to battery technology to quantum. But at the end of the day, every industry that people aren't talking about enough are the industries that we care the most about as they relate to national security and critical technology.
Something that I'm fascinated by right now, and I love things that I can personally try and be a guinea pig for, is what I'd broadly call neurotech, and particularly non-invasive. So these are medical devices that are typically FDA approved and tested that often are just electrical stimulants or vibrations or things, and can have real therapeutic and medical benefits. And so some of them treat opioid addiction. I have one that it's like a little puck on your chest that activates your vagus nerve and helps reduce anxiety. I had this that's called a Sensate. There's this chair you can sit on that's like all speakers, and it does that whole thing to your body. It's called a shift wave chair, and it literally like activates your nervous system and then shuts it down. And then there's a tiny little puck called Apollo Neuro that modulates your circadian rhythm and your sleep cycle just by vibrating every once in a while. And these are all like actually doctors approved, like are looking at them and saying they really work. And it fascinates me that you can have these real impacts through not a drug, nothing that cuts you open, not replacing anything or ripping anything out, but just by, these little
engineering. So I think this could revolutionize American manufacturing, doing much more building, testing, certification of incredibly complex systems in silico. It's going to speed up manufacturing and dramatically reduce the costs. And, even for the most sophisticated military aircraft, for example, the longer term, post-quantum, I think one area that's always been a little sleepy for venture, but is going to come alive and be fascinating, is materials. We're going to be able to create materials to exact specifications that no one had ever dreamed of, because quantum computers will enable us to understand down to the molecular structure how to do it. And I think it will enable all sorts of new space travel technologies, military technologies that we never thought were possible.
Katherine, I'm over time, so but real quick.
Yeah, so one meme that existed in Defense 1.0 was that you had to be a prime, you had to sell directly to the government if you were a defense tech company. Now I think we're seeing a number of companies that want to sell component parts, sell systems to prime contractors, sell to Raytheon, sell to Boeing, sell to Lockheed Martin. And I think there's a strong belief that those companies can become very large as suppliers.
I want to thank this amazing panel. And again, hit up Jason if you need a job. I might apply.
Please do.
Talk to me if you want to quit yours.
And thanks for everyone for coming. And I hope you found this useful. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.